Welcome, all pregnant families, midwives, or birth workers. This is Tracey Anderson-Askew, your host for the Transform Your Birth podcast, changing your mind about birth one story at a time. Each week, we will be exploring a birth story through the lens of what birth can teach us. I'll be digging deep into each story so you can learn what it is that can change the way a birth unfolds. We can't control birth, but we can influence it. So listen in to find out how. Enjoy. Last week, we heard Hannah Darlin talk about the evidence and challenges of induction of labour. Women are often told that their labours are going to need to be induced without fully understanding the risks of induction, compared to waiting and doing some extra monitoring. She helped us to understand the importance of treating each pregnancy individually and really looking at the signs that might tell us that baby really does need to come now. In this episode, I will take this topic one step further and share how I prepare women for induction. These two episodes together will help you to step into your power when making a decision to induce and how to prepare.
Before we begin, a note from our sponsor. This episode has been brought to you by Transform Parenting, an organisation that provides courses, coaching and community from pregnancy through to the first 7 years of a child's life. Most of the stories you will hear through this podcast are graduates of the Transform Your Birth workshop held in Canberra. Our Transform Your Birth Today course is now available to anyone, anywhere, at any time, and includes all the wonderful wisdom of this course and live weekly catch-ups when you need it with our host, Tracey. For a little taste, please accept our pregnancy gift offer, which contains free the first few lessons and some essential wisdom for pregnancy. The link can be found in these show notes or visit transformyourbirth.com.au. And now for the episode.
Welcome everyone to the Transform Your Birth podcast. Good to have you with me again this week. This week I'm going to cover a topic around the induction of labour and how I prepare women to take that step. Now, if you haven't listened to the previous episode, I think it's a good idea to do that so you really understand the ins and outs of induction. And if you're choosing to go ahead with the induction, then what I'm going to share with you in this episode is going to be really helpful. So let's get started. Now, assuming you've asked the questions and come to the conclusion that this is the path you're taking, then one of the couple of things we need to do is leading up to the labour is get our bodies in the best possible state that we can. So making sure you stay active, walking each day if you can. I know that can be hard when you're really heavily pregnant. Getting on, if you've got a birth ball at home, moving your hips, trying to balance your body. Spend lots of time leaning forward if you can. We want to make sure Bubby's at the front of your belly, not on your spine. And so not too much reclining. If you need to sort of rest, lie on your left side instead. That just can really promote baby to be in a good position. Now, when preparing for birth, whether it be induction or any birth, I often talk about birth readiness, which is it's a little bit of a wobbly space that we can come to at the end of our pregnancy where we really start to challenge, what's this going to be like? How am I going to feel? Can I really do this? I often find that even with women who've done my course and they're really well prepared and they've done the practices and they've been focusing on their breathing and all of those great things, and then they get to the end and they have a bit of a crisis of confidence. That's really normal, and I'll tell you why. Because the deeper part of you knows that you're about to walk into the mystery, that you can't control this. You've got to I call it taking a walk on the wild side. And so there can be a lot of feelings rumbling underneath your being that want to come out at that point. And what's happening is you're getting ready to get to that point of surrender where you just want to let go. It's like, oh God, I'm just so over this. I just want the baby to come. I'm ready for anything. It's that I'm ready for anything type moment. Okay. That's called birth readiness. I'll tell you a quick story. My first two children, when I gave birth to them, were both breech babies, and they came out bum first. Back in the days where there were many, many carers who were very comfortable with that mode of delivery. With my third, I really wanted a head-down baby, and I had my own midwife, and he'd been in a beautiful head-down position for most of the pregnancy, and we were about 37, 38 weeks, I can't quite remember, but it was in that last stage of pregnancy. And when she was palpating my stomach, she couldn't feel his head down. And she thought, oh, I think your baby might have turned. And there was a part of me that, was trying to control. I was trying to make it work. I was trying to keep him head down, doing all the right things, the spinning babies, all that stuff. And after she left, I walked up to a hill not far from where I lived. And I got to the top of the hill and I just had a big emotional meltdown. I just had a big cry. Why is this so hard? Why do I have to always have upside down babies? And it was a cry. It was a rage. It was just absolute that frustration of trying to control, and then letting go was being invited to happen. It didn't quite happen on the hill, but when I got back, and I was sitting outside with my other two children playing in the backyard, and somebody had given me this beautiful book it's like a coffee table book of beautiful photography of mothers and babies. And I was just flicking through, looking at these beautiful images. And it was in that moment that something shifted inside of me. And I remember closing my eyes and saying to my baby, if you come upside down, sideways, cesarean, vaginal, I don't care. I just want to meet you. And I surrendered to the fact that I just can't control this. Okay, so that's a great story of birth readiness where you just get to that point where you're just like, oh, I'm ready for anything. Now, when you're being induced, you might not have the time and the space for a lot of that to happen. So one of the exercises I often give my women to do prior to the labor is to write a letter to your baby expressing your greatest hopes and fears. And so maybe light a candle, maybe you get some sparkling apple juice in a wine glass, or set it up so it's really beautiful so you can just be with yourself for a little while. And then just start writing to your baby and saying, oh, I really wanted you to come this way and we're going to have to induce you. And I'm really sorry. I hope this is going to be okay. Whatever comes out of your mouth, just dump it on a piece of paper. Now, whether you give it to your baby or not, it's very irrelevant. It's inviting you to connect in with your baby. It's inviting you to get really clear on what's important. And it can promote that emotional release that can bring you into a greater state of birth readiness. Because ultimately, we have to let go. We know we can't control this. And so we've got to really invite that state of surrender. And guess what? That's exactly what your labor needs as well, for you to surrender. Okay. Another couple of things I'll talk about with preparation is some body work. I'm a great believer in acupuncture that can promote ripeness. Acupuncture is a wonderful modality that works on the meridian system of the body, which are the energetic pathways. And so by stimulating certain points, it can get things to move, to shift, to not be stagnant. Now, I asked Hannah about the evidence around acupuncture. There's not a great deal of it. And part of the problem is there's many different approaches with acupuncture. But certainly acupuncture in itself, if it does promote that movement of the body, and it can really bring you into a greater state of ripeness and readiness, and potentially even bring you into labor. So if you can get away with a bit of acupuncture, that can be really helpful. Other body work modalities are things like chiropractic or osteopathy. Wonderful modalities to, once again, like a little bit like acupuncture, make sure everything's aligned, moving, and in a greater state of balance. There's also theories around sex to promote labor, and for two reasons. If you're having sex with a male partner, the semen has a ripening agent to it for the cervix. Isn't that interesting? Mother Nature's pretty clever, isn't she? And connection, love, even orgasm, if you can manage it, promotes the release of oxytocin, and that's what promotes labor. So doing things, whether you can manage sex or not, but just being loving, having loving moments where, I don't know, if it's with your pet or your partner or people close to you, once again, you're signaling to your body that you're safe, that you've got lots of oxytocin, and that you're more ready to let this baby out into the world. If you're on the go, on the go, on the go, on the go, you're telling your baby that you're not in your nest. So sex, relaxation, just pottering around doing things. Don't talk to people about whether the baby's come or not. Just give yourself that time and that space. Okay. So once again, we can't control. Sometimes we can influence, and you want to try and do the very best to create the perfect conditions for your body to be in balance, for you to have released that emotional tension, and for you to surrender and be ready to walk on that path. Okay. Now, prior to the induction, ask these questions, and you might need to write these down. If the induction doesn't start my labor, what are my choices? It's really good for you to understand what plan B might look like. Ask this question: can I go home at any time? Now, you actually can go home at any time. It is your choice. But it's important to remember that sometimes those early parts of labour don't kick things in straight away. And if you're feeling a bit stressed in hospital, you haven't had much sleep, and you just need a bit of time to go home and recalibrate, that's a very valid thing to ask for, because it's really important that you're well rested. Okay. And also with your carers, let them know what is important to you by giving them your birth map. Now, Birth Map, this is Catherine Bell's work. She helps us to understand that by creating a bit of a map of helping people to understand who you are and what's important to you and what your choices might be under certain conditions is a great communication and negotiation tool. It's absolutely worth doing. If you have any carers who just poo-poo it and say, oh, birth plans, nothing goes to plan, insist that they read it. They have to read it. Okay, because this is part of informed consent. It's part of helping them to understand what's important to you and how you're approaching it. And it can invite some good discussions prior to labour starting as to what needs to be respected. And it's amazing how little things can make a big difference. The other thing to do prior to the labour is to negotiate your ability to move. So ask for monitoring, like the Bluetooth monitor or eventually the scalp monitor if the baby's nice and low, so that you don't get stuck on the bed. Unless, of course, you feel really comfortable there, and that's fine. But most women, when they're in labour, they need the freedom to respond intuitively to their labour. And the reason that's really important is because they're looking for comfort, and it's in their search for comfort that they typically assume the best positions to support the physiological descent of the baby, making labour shorter. Okay, so it's very, very important that you don't get stuck on the bed and you have the ability to respond physically, physiologically to your labour. And the other thing to talk about is to negotiate the ability to use the birth pool as a form of support for the pain relief. Okay. You can hit up against a few walls with that, but some people are able to manage that. So just see how you go. Now, let's talk mindset. It's really important when you're moving into the space of doing something like an induction that you get your mind on board. Okay. So as you go in and at every stage of the process, mentally affirm to yourself, I'm choosing to do this and I'm choosing to feel great about it. Your body responds to the words and images you give it. So if you're sitting there going, oh, this is awful, I really didn't want this, this is going to be so painful, and then you think of all of the stories you've heard of painful inductions, then that's going to put your body into a state of tension, making it more painful and harder. Okay. If you have an untethered mind, if you let your mind run the show, it's like a wild horse. It'll go everywhere, everywhere that you don't want it to go. You need to tether it. You need to put a harness on the horse and direct your mind towards words and images that are going to support you. Like, this is great. Thank you for coming into my body and getting my baby here safely. I welcome everything into my body. Okay. So beautiful words, beautiful images, affirmations that support you to stay centered, that support you to focus on the things you want rather than what you don't want is so, so powerful, because the mind and the body are one and the same thing. What you tell your mind will be reflected in the way your body responds to the labor. Okay. Now let's talk induction. There are 3 stages. Just quickly, the first stage is some type of ripening or agent or an appliance that tries to open the cervix. Now, they might offer you a stretch and sweep prior to the day, and that's something worth considering. It's a vaginal examination, and Hannah talked about this, where they're trying to just open that cervix a little bit and pull at the waters a little bit and create a little bit of separation, which can stimulate labor. Well, the first stage of the actual induction process is to take that one step further by either putting some type of ripening agent, or if the cervix is separated enough, they might use a little balloon which tries to continue to separate it. Okay, so get them to explain why they're choosing what they are and why, and what might be the side effects of that. So that's point number one. The second is they'll try to break your waters. Now, that will depend on how open you are. And interestingly enough, those two parts of the induction process might be enough to kick it off. So you can ask to hold back on the syntocinon, which is a cannula with synthetic oxytocin, if you're already getting some good solid contractions, or even if you're in the early stages. Let them know you're not in a hurry. You're happy to see how these contractions go, and do your best to stay as relaxed as you can through them. Sometimes one or even 1 and 2 can be enough to kick off your labor, and then you don't need the syntocinon. Sometimes, though, carers in their minds say we do the first stage and then the second stage, and then we put in the synto. Okay, they just assume that that's how you're going to do it, but you can actually ask to have a bit of time to see how this labor kicks off. So that's always good to know. And of course, every woman has a different level of ripeness, a different metabolic response to these drugs. So it's very important, if you do go down the path of having the syntocinon, that you ask them to keep an eye on it, you let them know that you're hoping to get through without any extra need for fuss, which is pain relief, those sorts of things. Pardon me. And could you please make sure that the syntocinon mimics a normal labor? So in doing that, because sometimes people are busy, they put it on, they may not be checking it as quickly. And if your contractions start to come upon top of each other, that can be quite compromising for both you and also the baby. We're really looking at no more than about 3 contractions in a 10-minute period. Okay. And we really want to protect the baby's oxygen supply, which is why that point's very, very important. So partners, that's a really important point for you to pay attention to make sure that the contractions aren't too close together and on top of each other. And of course, every woman's going to respond differently. So the midwife needs to be paying attention to make sure that it just gradually increases over time, enough for the mother's other hormones to start to kick in to help her to manage labor like it was any other normal labor. Okay. Now, pain support. There are many things that can make labor more manageable for a birthing woman before you look at pharmacological birth options, birth pain relief options. Movement, changing positions, hot packs on your belly, hot packs on your lower back, massage, acupressure points, hopping in the shower, hip squeeze, squeezing her hips because that releases a lot of tension, bouncing on the birth ball or doing hip circles on the birth ball. And the biggest one of all is learning to breathe optimally, to fully oxygenate that uterus. And by the way, it doesn't mean deep breathing. I have another episode on breathing. Have a look at it. It's really worth listening to because it helps us to understand when breathing doesn't become optimal and we overbreathe. And when we overbreathe, we get less oxygen, not more. So breathing is one of the most powerful tools in that toolkit because it can change labors. How you oxygenate that uterus is very, very important to travel that path of least resistance. And of course, you have those lovely performance-enhancing hormones, feel-good hormones, and we want to try and elicit as many of them as we can by staying relaxed and to stay deep in the zone of labor where we're not thinking, we're not worrying about what's going on around us. We're just working on this contraction right here, right now. Now, I just want to talk about epidurals. The goal of an unmedicated birth is a worthy goal because the drugs come at a cost to you and to baby. And I have another episode on the drugs. So for more information on this, have a look at that episode. And it's going to be important if you choose to try to do it without an epidural that you let your caregivers know that you would appreciate their support in helping you to find comfort, that you're hoping to avoid the epidural. Because once you have an epidural, that sets up another level of complexity that you then have to overcome during the birth, particularly in second stage. Okay, it might mean that you need help to get the baby out. So if you can avoid an epidural, it's a good idea to by using all of those other tools. Having said that, though, inductions can be much harder on the mum as the sensations are fueled by an artificial oxytocin, not the body's own oxytocin. The body's own oxytocin is a feel-good hormone and it has lots of other qualities to it. But in the case of induction, it might be appropriate to have an epidural to protect the emotional state of the mother so she doesn't feel too overwhelmed in the process of giving birth. So have a think about that. Do a little bit of getting your head around what options you might look at first and under what conditions you might consider using an epidural. Okay. So you're in the induction. If at any time you want a break, you want to get off the bus, it is your choice. You can go home and recalibrate, assuming there's nothing really obvious about the baby's well-being. Okay. I had a couple who shared their story about going in for an induction, and they went in the first day, and everybody was so busy, and the labour room ward was full, and they got to, I can't remember what time of the day they went in, but it got very, very late at night, and they were ready to sort of start the induction, and they said, "Look, is our baby all right? I think we'll go home and get a good night's sleep." Then the second day came, they rocked up again the next day, and the same thing happened. It was busy, people were all over the place, and they were waiting and waiting. They spent 2 days waiting in hospital. And when it started getting really, really late at night, they said, "Look, let's just leave it, assuming the baby's okay. Let's just leave it. We'll come in again tomorrow." Now, the caregivers were incredibly empathic towards their situation, said, "Oh, we are so sorry. We'll make sure tomorrow it's absolutely on." But there was another couple who insisted on pushing through, and the mother, who was a woman who I'd worked with, could see that this woman was really tired and she was about to have an induction. Anyway, they came in the next day and, with the support of the carers, because they had been very apologetic, started the induction process, and it all went really well. And she ended up seeing the other woman who'd pushed through that night, and she'd had a very, very difficult experience because she was just so tired. So I thought it was a great story because at the end of the day, we want to be in the best conditions to support the success of the induction and to keep it as low complex as we can without inviting other sort of things into the mix. And she was very, very grateful that she made the decision, even on day 2. I mean, she was pretty cranky, but she just realized that, no, this is not going to be right. And so by the time they had the induction, she was in the perfect space. She'd been tested. She had to learn to let go of control. And as a result, the induction went really, really well. And I've had many, many women who've told me their induction stories, and they've worked incredibly well. So induction is not the end of things. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be difficult and complex. It can go very, very well. I had a woman going in for an induction, and I think she went in at night. And she rang me at 9 o'clock in the morning and said, "Guess what I've got in my arms?" And her induction was so efficient and worked so, so well. And she got through without any extra need for fuss. And I could hear it in her voice. She'd really been able to work with the induction beautifully. She treated it as a normal labour, used all of her tools of the mind. Her partner helped her to find comfort. She used a breath, and it worked really beautifully. So yes, you can hear some stories where inductions can be very difficult, but given the right conditions, we can often pull it off without any extra need for fuss. So I hope this has been helpful for you. It's a good topic and it's one I've been wanting to do for a long time. So having Hannah talk about it in the depth she did last week, along with this, should set you up beautifully. Lots of love, and we'll see you again next week. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please subscribe and share this podcast. This episode has been brought to you by Transform Parenting, an organisation that provides courses, coaching and community from pregnancy through to the first 7 years of a child's life. It is a place where you can learn, get support and grow into your role as a parent. Why not take advantage of a special gift for all pregnant women at transformyourbirth.com.au. Or if you have children, we have a gift for parents also.